Excuse me, do you even know how to use a computer? The sneer in Marcus Chen's voice cut through the quiet atmosphere of the Denver Public Library's Central Branch. At 28, Marcus commanded attention wherever he went, 6 feet of lean muscle. Wrapped in designer clothes, his perfectly styled hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. As the library's newly appointed digital innovation director, he'd made it his mission to modernize what he called the dusty old institution. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Standing behind the reference desk, 34-year-old Elena Rodriguez looked up from the worn paperback she'd been reading during her lunch break. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose gave her the stereotypical librarian appearance that Marcus seemed to find so amusing. She wore a modest cardigan over a plain blue blouse, nothing that would draw attention or suggest the extraordinary life she'd once lived. "I'm sorry, can I help you with something?" Elena asked, her voice soft but steady. She closed her book, a biography of Amelia Earhart, and set it aside, giving Marcus her full attention. Marcus gestured dramatically toward the computer terminals scattered throughout the main floor. "These ancient machines are embarrassing. I've been trying to explain to the board that we need someone who actually understands technology running this place, not someone who thinks card catalogs are cutting-edge innovation." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by Marcus's increasingly loud voice. Elena noticed Mrs. Patterson, a regular patron, shifting uncomfortably in her chair nearby. 2 college students at a study table had stopped taking notes and were watching the scene unfold with the kind of fascination reserved for public confrontations. "The computers are functioning properly," Elena replied calmly. "Is there a specific technical issue you're experiencing?" Marcus laughed, a sound that carried more mockery than humor. "Technical issue? The issue is that we're trying to run a 21st century library with 20th century thinking. When the board realizes what this place needs, they'll bring in someone who can actually navigate the digital world." Elena's grip tightened slightly on the edge of the desk, but her expression remained neutral. In her previous life, she'd faced down enemy aircraft at 30,000 feet and landed fighter jets on aircraft carriers in rough seas. She'd commanded respect in briefing rooms full of seasoned military officers and earned decorations for valor under fire. But here, in this quiet corner of civilian life she'd deliberately chosen, she found herself subjected to a different kind of combat, one where her weapons were patience and professionalism. "I'd be happy to help you with any specific needs," she offered again, though Marcus had already turned away, addressing his comments to the growing audience. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, gesturing toward Elena as if she were an exhibit in a museum. "Libraries are supposed to be about information and innovation, not about hiding behind outdated systems and hoping nobody notices." The confrontation had drawn the attention of several staff members. Janet Morrison, the head librarian, approached with obvious concern etched on her face. At 58, Janet had run the library for over a decade and prided herself on maintaining a harmonious work environment. She'd hired Elena 2 years ago and had never received a single complaint about her work, quite the opposite, in fact. "Is there a problem here?" Janet asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to maintaining order. Marcus straightened, his demeanor shifting slightly in the presence of senior management. "I was just discussing the technology gap we're facing. No disrespect to Elena, but I think we need to seriously consider whether our current staffing meets the demands of modern library science." Elena felt the familiar weight of judgment settling around her shoulders. It wasn't the first time someone had made assumptions about her capabilities based on her quiet demeanor and unassuming appearance. In her military career, she'd faced similar doubts from pilots who questioned whether a woman belonged in the cockpit of a fighter jet. The difference was that in the Air Force, her skills had been tested and proven in ways that left no room for doubt. "Elena is one of our most capable staff members," Janet said firmly. "She's handled every technical challenge we've faced since she started here." Marcus's smile was condescending. "I'm sure she's great at checking out books and helping people find the bathroom. But running digital systems? Managing databases? Implementing new technologies? That requires a different skill set entirely." The comment stung, not because Elena doubted her own abilities, but because it represented the kind of narrow thinking that had driven her to seek a quieter life in the first place. She'd spent years proving herself in environments where competence was measured by life-and-death decisions, where a moment's hesitation or a slight miscalculation could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Perhaps Elena said quietly, we could discuss this privately rather than in front of our patrons. Marcus turned back to her, his expression suggesting he'd forgotten she was still there. You know what? You're right. This isn't the place for this conversation. But the board meeting next week? That's definitely going to be the place. He walked away, leaving Elena standing behind the reference desk with the eyes of a dozen patrons and colleagues upon her. The library's usual quiet atmosphere felt charged with tension and unspoken questions. Janet lingered for a moment, her expression sympathetic. Don't let him get to you, she said softly. He's been pushing for changes since the day he arrived. Some of his ideas have merit, but his approach leaves a lot to be desired. Elena nodded, appreciating the support even as she felt the familiar urge to defend herself more forcefully. In her previous life, she would have had concrete achievements to point to, mission records and commendations that spoke for themselves. Here, her accomplishments were quieter but no less real: the research databases she'd organized, the digital archives she'd helped establish, the countless patrons she'd assisted in navigating both old and new information systems. As the afternoon wore on, Elena found herself the subject of curious glances and whispered conversations. She'd worked hard to build a reputation for competence and reliability, but Marcus's public challenge had planted seeds of doubt that would be difficult to root out. The library world, she was learning, had its own form of politics and territorialism. During her break, Elena stepped outside onto the library's front steps, seeking a moment of fresh air and perspective. Downtown Denver stretched out before her, a mix of modern skyscrapers and historic buildings that reflected the city's evolution from frontier town to metropolitan center. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the deliberate choices she'd made to build a different kind of life. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria in Colorado Springs. How's the quiet life treating you? Still happy with the career change? Elena smiled despite the afternoon's tension. Maria was the only family member who knew the full story of her military service, the only one who understood the weight of the decisions that had led her to civilian life. The question was more loaded than it appeared. Maria had been skeptical of Elena's choice to leave behind a distinguished military career for what she saw as a significant step down in prestige and purpose. Most days, Elena typed back, not wanting to burden her sister with the afternoon's drama. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement, came the quick reply. You know there are still openings in the aerospace industry if you change your mind. Elena pocketed her phone without responding. She'd had this conversation with Maria multiple times over the past 2 years. The aerospace job offers were real and lucrative, positions that would utilize her technical expertise and leadership experience. But they would also pull her back into a world she'd consciously chosen to leave behind. When she returned to the reference desk, she found a small stack of questions waiting for her attention. Mrs. Patterson needed help accessing genealogy records online. A graduate student required assistance with historical newspaper archives. A teenager working on a school project needed guidance navigating scientific databases. Each request was an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities, to prove that competence came in many forms. As she worked through the afternoon, Elena found herself remembering her father's words from years ago. During her first week at the Air Force Academy, Mija, some people will always underestimate you. That's their weakness, not yours. Let your work speak for itself. Colonel Roberto Rodriguez had been a fighter pilot himself, one of the first Latino officers to achieve that rank. He'd understood the challenges his daughter would face in a male-dominated field, and he'd prepared her for the reality that she would have to prove herself repeatedly, often to people who had already decided she didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on Elena that she now found herself in a similar situation in a profession often stereotyped as female-dominated. Marcus's assumptions were different but equally limiting: that quiet meant incompetent, that preference for traditional methods indicated technological illiteracy, that choosing a supportive role meant lacking ambition or capability. As closing time approached, Elena began her routine of shutting down computer terminals and organizing materials for the next day's staff. She moved with the efficient precision that had once characterized her pre-flight checks, attention to detail that had kept her alive in situations where mechanical failure or oversight could prove fatal. Janet stopped by the reference desk as Elena was finishing her tasks. I wanted to apologize for this afternoon, she said. Marcus was out of line. It's not your fault, Elena replied. He's not wrong about the need for technological advancement. His approach could use some work. But the core message has merit. Janet studied her for a moment. You know, in 2 years of working here, I've never seen you lose your temper or even raise your voice. Where does that composure come from? Elena paused in her organizing, considering how to answer. I've been in situations where staying calm was important, she said finally. It becomes a habit. Well, it's a good habit to have in this business, Janet said. But don't let people mistake calmness for weakness. You have more authority than you use. As Elena walked to her car in the staff parking lot, she reflected on Janet's words. Authority was something she'd once wielded with confidence, commanding respect through demonstrated competence and clear communication. But that authority had come with a cost: the constant pressure to prove herself, the weight of responsibility for others' lives, the gradual erosion of her sense of self under the demands of military excellence. Her apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, chosen for its proximity to the library and its anonymity. Elena had deliberately crafted a life that required no explanations, no justifications, no constant proof of her worth. She'd traded the adrenaline rush of high-stakes missions for the satisfaction of helping patrons find information they needed. She'd exchanged the brotherhood of military service for the quieter connections formed over shared books and research projects. That evening, as she prepared dinner and caught up on professional reading, Elena found herself thinking about the box tucked away in her bedroom closet. Inside were medals, commendations, photographs, and documents that told the story of Captain Elena Rodriguez, fighter pilot, who had flown missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, who had broken barriers and earned the respect of her peers through skill and dedication. The Distinguished Flying Cross sat in that box, awarded for her actions during a mission that had gone wrong in ways that still haunted her dreams. The Air Medal with oak leaf clusters represented multiple combat missions flown with distinction. The Aerial Achievement Medal recognized her contributions to pilot training programs that had improved safety and effectiveness across her squadron, but also in that box were the memories she'd tried to leave behind, the weight of command decisions that had cost lives. The pressure of representing not just herself but all women in combat aviation, the gradual realization that her identity had become so intertwined with her military service that she'd lost sight of who she was outside of it. She'd left the Air Force at the height of her career, turning down promotion opportunities and advanced training programs that would have elevated her to senior leadership positions. Her commanding officers had been puzzled by her decision, her peers had questioned her judgment, and her family had struggled to understand why she would walk away from such a distinguished career. The truth was simpler than any of them realized. Elena had needed to find out who she was when she wasn't defined by her ability to fly faster, higher, and more precisely than anyone else. She'd needed to discover whether she could find satisfaction in work that didn't require her to risk her life or command others who risked theirs. 2 years into her civilian life, she'd begun to find answers to those questions. The work at the library was meaningful in ways that surprised her. Helping a veteran research benefit programs, assisting a student with a complex research project, organizing information systems that made knowledge more accessible. These tasks lacked the dramatic intensity of combat missions, but they carried their own form of purpose. Marcus's challenge threatened to disrupt the equilibrium she'd worked so hard to achieve. Not because she feared professional consequences, but because it forced her to confront the question of whether she could defend her choices without revealing the full scope of what she'd given up. As she settled into bed with a book, Elena made a decision that would prove more consequential than she realized at the time. She would not retreat from Marcus's challenge, would not seek to avoid the confrontation he seemed determined to create. Instead, she would meet it with the same steady professionalism that had served her well in both military and civilian contexts. She had no intention of revealing her past to win an argument, but she also wouldn't allow her competence to be questioned without response. The next week's board meeting would be an opportunity to demonstrate that quiet strength and technical capability were not mutually exclusive, that leadership came in many forms, and that assumptions about people's capabilities were often dangerous miscalculations. Elena closed her book and turned off the bedside lamp, her mind already beginning to organize the presentation she would need to prepare. In her military career, she'd learned that the best defense was often a well-executed offense, and that precision in planning was just as important as precision in execution. The quiet librarian had been challenged, and she would respond, but on her own terms, and in her own way. The question was whether that response would be enough to satisfy her critics while preserving the carefully constructed boundaries of her new life. As sleep approached, Elena found herself thinking about the motto that had guided her through her darkest moments in military service: per aspera ad astra, through hardships to the stars. She'd reached the stars once, literally and figuratively, flying higher than most people ever dreamed. Now she was learning that there were other ways to soar, other altitudes worth exploring. The coming week would test whether she could navigate this new challenge without sacrificing the peace she'd worked so hard to achieve. Marcus had no idea what kind of opponent he'd chosen, but Elena was about to discover whether her commitment to her new life was strong enough to weather the storm he seemed determined to create. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Elena to choose Between the safety of anonymity and the risk of standing up for herself in ways that might expose the very secrets she'd worked so hard to protect. The quiet librarian's secret was about to be tested, and the outcome would determine not just her professional future, but her ability to maintain the delicate balance between her past and present identities. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, Denver's weather matching Elena's mood as she made her way to the library. She'd spent most of the night preparing for the inevitable follow-up to Marcus's public challenge, organizing talking points about the library's digital systems and her contributions to their modernization efforts. But as she walked through the staff entrance, she sensed something had shifted in the building's atmosphere. Conversations stopped abruptly when she passed groups of colleagues, and she caught fragments of whispered discussions that seemed to center around yesterday's confrontation. The library's rumor mill had been working overtime, and Elena suspected that Marcus's version of events had been circulating since before she'd even left the building. "Elena, could I see you in my office?" Janet's voice carried across the main floor, and Elena noticed the formal tone that replaced their usual casual interactions. As she walked toward the administrative wing, she passed Marcus's office and saw him through the glass door, gesturing animatedly while speaking on his phone. Janet's office was a cramped space filled with filing cabinets, stacks of budget reports, and photographs documenting the library's evolution over the decades. A picture of the staff from Elena's first day sat on the desk, everyone smiling and optimistic about the future. The contrast with the current situation felt stark. "I've been getting calls," Janet said without preamble, settling behind her desk. With obvious discomfort. "Board members, donors, even some city council staff. Marcus has been busy this morning." Elena took a seat in the worn chair across from Janet's desk, maintaining the same composed expression that had served her well in countless military briefings. "What kind of calls?" "Questions about our technology infrastructure, our staff qualifications, our ability to serve the community's evolving needs." Janet's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent years building relationships and protecting her institution. "There's going to be a special session added to next week's board meeting specifically to address these concerns." "I see." Elena processed this information with the same systematic approach she'd once used to analyze intelligence reports. Marcus wasn't just challenging her competence, he was orchestrating a campaign to reshape the library's leadership structure. Janet leaned forward, her expression mixing concern with curiosity. "Elena, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything in your background that would help us address these questions about technical expertise?" The question hung in the air like a challenge Elena had been dreading. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had prepared for it in abstract terms, but facing it in Janet's cluttered office felt different than she'd imagined. "What do you mean?" Elena asked, buying time to consider her response. "I mean, your resume shows library science education and some previous work experience, but it's pretty sparse on details before you started your master's program. And there's something about the way you handle complex technical problems that suggests more background than you've shared." Elena felt the familiar tension between her desire for privacy and her professional obligations. In her military career, operational security had been paramount, but the mission had always been clear. Here, the stakes were different but no less significant to her personal well-being. "I have some technical background," she said carefully. "But I chose to focus on library science because I wanted a career change." Janet studied her for a long moment. "Elena, I'm not trying to pry into your personal life. But if you have qualifications that could help us address these concerns, now might be the time to share them. The board is scheduled to meet with Marcus privately before the general session, and I suspect he's going to make a strong case for restructuring our technology department." Before Elena could respond, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Sarah Kim, the library's young adult services coordinator, peered in with obvious excitement. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Elena, you need to see this." Sarah held up her phone, displaying a social media post that made Elena's stomach tighten. "Marcus posted this about an hour ago." The post was a photo of the library's main computer lab, with a caption that read, "When your workplace is stuck in the past. Because leadership won't embrace qualified professionals. Time for change at Denver Public Library. #modernization now #digital innovation." Elena felt a familiar surge of anger, the same emotion she'd experienced when facing enemy fire or dealing with incompetent commanders who put politics ahead of mission success. But unlike those situations, here she couldn't respond with the directness that had served her well in military contexts. "He's been posting similar content all morning," Sarah continued. "And he's got quite a following. The engagement numbers are pretty significant." Janet's expression darkened as she scrolled through the comments on Marcus's post. "This is completely inappropriate. He's making this personal and public in ways that could damage the library's reputation. Elena read over Janet's shoulder, noting the mix of supportive comments from Marcus's followers and defensive responses from library patrons who'd had positive experiences with the staff. The online conversation was already polarizing, with people taking sides based on limited information and preconceived notions about libraries and technology. There's more, Sarah said reluctantly. He's also been reaching out to local tech blogs and media outlets. I have a contact at Denver Tech Weekly who says Marcus pitched them a story about institutional resistance to innovation in public libraries. The situation was escalating beyond Elena's initial assessment. Marcus wasn't just challenging her competence, he was building a narrative that positioned himself as a reformer facing institutional opposition. The strategy was sophisticated and potentially effective, especially given the public's general perception of libraries as outdated institutions struggling with digital transformation. I need to make some calls, Janet said, her administrative instincts kicking in. Elena, I want you to document everything you've accomplished here, every technical project you've worked on, every system you've improved. We need to be prepared to defend our track record. As Elena left Janet's office, she found herself thinking about the parallel between her current situation and the challenges she'd faced as a young pilot. In both cases, her competence was being questioned by people who made assumptions based on appearance and preconceptions. The difference was that in the military, she'd had clear metrics for proving her worth: flight hours, mission success rates, technical proficiency scores. Library work was less quantifiable but no less important. Over the past 2 years, she'd quietly revolutionized several of the library's digital systems, implementing security protocols that protected patron data, streamlining database access procedures, and developing training programs that had improved staff technical literacy. Her work had been thorough and effective, but she deliberately avoided seeking recognition for it. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very qualities that had made her an exceptional pilot, attention to detail, systematic thinking, calm under pressure, were now being dismissed as irrelevant to modern library operations. Marcus saw her quietness as incompetence, her preference for working behind the scenes as an inability to lead. During her lunch break, Elena made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of eating in the staff room or taking a walk as she usually did, she drove to the wings over the Rockies Air and Space Museum. She hadn't visited since moving to Denver, had actively avoided places that might trigger memories of her military service. The museum was nearly empty on a Tuesday afternoon, allowing Elena to wander through the exhibits without attracting attention. She paused in front of a display featuring Colorado's contributions to military aviation, reading about pilots who'd trained at Peterson Air Force Base and served in conflicts around the world. A photograph caught her eye, a group of female pilots from various service branches, taken during a ceremony honoring women in combat aviation. Elena recognized several faces, including her own, though the caption didn't include individual names. She'd been younger then, her face marked by the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. You thinking about joining up? An elderly voice asked behind her. Elena turned to find a museum volunteer, a man in his 70s wearing a badge that identified him as a Korean War veteran. His eyes held the particular look of someone who'd seen combat and recognized it in others. Just browsing, Elena replied, but something in her expression must have given away more than she intended. I was Air Force myself, he said. Flew B-29s during the war. These new planes, though, he gestured toward a display of modern fighter jets, there's something else entirely. Takes a special kind of person to handle that kind of speed and complexity. Elena nodded, memories flooding back despite her efforts to suppress them. The sensation of pulling G-forces that pushed her body to its limits, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between mission success and failure, the brotherhood of pilots who trusted each other with their lives. Did you serve? The volunteer asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. A lifetime ago, Elena replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The old man studied her face with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to read people under extreme circumstances. It's never really a lifetime ago, is it? Stays with you, for better or worse. Elena left the museum with more questions than answers, but with a clearer understanding of the choice she was facing. She could continue to hide her past, allowing Marcus to define the narrative about her competence and the library's direction. Or she could trust that the skills and values that had served her well in military service might also serve her in civilian life, even if it meant risking the anonymity she'd worked so hard to preserve. That afternoon, she returned to the library to find the situation had deteriorated further. Marcus had scheduled a staff meeting for the next morning, ostensibly to discuss digital transformation initiatives, but Elena suspected it was really an opportunity to build support for his vision of organizational change. As she worked at the reference desk, helping patrons with research questions and technical issues, Elena found herself observing the library's operations with new eyes. The steady stream of people seeking information, the quiet conversations between staff and patrons, the collaborative atmosphere that had drawn her to library work, all of it represented something valuable that Marcus seemed determined to reshape. In his own image. Mrs. Patterson approached the desk with a familiar smile. "Elena, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I couldn't help but notice some tension around here lately. Is everything all right?" Elena looked at the elderly woman who'd become one of her regular patrons, someone she'd helped with genealogy research and computer tutorials. Mrs. Patterson represented the kind of personal connection that made library work meaningful, relationships built over time through shared interests and mutual respect. "Just some workplace politics," Elena said, not wanting to burden a patron with internal conflicts. "Well, I hope they resolve it sensibly," Mrs. Patterson said. "You've been nothing but helpful to me and everyone else I've seen you work with. Some people don't appreciate competence when they see it." As closing time approached, Elena made another decision that would prove significant. Instead of going home to her quiet apartment, she drove to a nearby coffee shop and began working on something she'd never thought she'd create: a comprehensive documentation of her contributions to the library's technology infrastructure. The document grew as she wrote, detailing projects that had improved system security, streamlined operations, and enhanced patron services. She included metrics where possible, showing improvements in database response times, reduction in technical support requests, and increased patron satisfaction scores for digital services. But as she worked, Elena realized that the document was more than a professional defense, it was a recognition of her own accomplishments in civilian life. She'd been so focused on escaping her military identity that she'd failed to acknowledge the ways she'd successfully applied her skills in a new context. The coffee shop was nearly empty when she finally closed her laptop, having spent 3 hours creating a presentation that would either save her position or force her to confront the full extent of her past. Either way, tomorrow's staff meeting would mark a turning point in her carefully constructed civilian life. As she drove home through Denver's quiet streets, Elena found herself thinking about the motto that had guided her through her military career: per aspera ad astra. Through hardships to the stars. She'd reached the stars once, literally and figuratively, commanding respect and achieving recognition in one of the world's most demanding professions. Now she was learning that there were different kinds of stars worth reaching for, different altitudes worth exploring. The question was whether she could defend her right to define her own trajectory without sacrificing the peace she'd worked so hard to achieve. The quiet librarian's secret was about to be tested in ways she'd never anticipated, and the outcome would determine not just her professional future, but her ability to maintain the delicate balance between her past achievements and her present choices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that strength came in many forms, and new tests of Elena's commitment to the life she'd chosen. The real battle was just beginning, and Elena was about to discover whether her carefully constructed civilian identity could withstand the storm Marcus seemed determined to create. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Elena to choose between the safety of anonymity and the risk of standing up for herself in ways that might expose the very secrets she'd worked so hard to protect. The quiet librarian's past was about to collide with her present, and the impact would reshape everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. The staff meeting convened at 8 a.m. sharp, with Marcus standing at the head of the conference room like a general addressing his troops. Elena sat quietly in the back, her laptop closed, watching as her colleagues filed in with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "We need to talk about the future of this library," Marcus began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. "The board is asking hard questions about our ability to serve a modern community, and frankly, some of our current staff may not be equipped for what's coming." His eyes found Elena in the back row. "We need people who understand technology, who can innovate, who can lead us into the digital age. Not people who hide behind outdated systems and hope nobody notices their limitations." Elena felt the familiar calm that had once preceded combat missions. She stood slowly, her movement drawing every eye in the room. "Marcus, you're absolutely right about needing qualified people," she said, her voice carrying a new authority that surprised even her. "So let me share some qualifications you might find interesting." She walked to the front of the room, her bearing subtly shifting from librarian to officer. "Before I became a librarian, I was Captain Elena Rodriguez, United States Air Force. I flew F-16 Fighting Falcons in combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. I have a degree in aerospace engineering and advanced certifications in avionics, systems, navigation technology, and electronic warfare. The room fell silent. Marcus's confident expression faltered. I've designed and implemented the security protocols protecting our patron databases. I've upgraded our server infrastructure and created the digital archive system that's become a model for other libraries. I did all of this quietly because I chose a life of service over recognition. Elena pulled out her phone and displayed a photograph, herself in flight gear standing beside an F-16, the distinguished flying cross visible on her uniform. I've commanded respect in briefing rooms full of colonels and generals. I've made split-second decisions at 30,000 feet that saved lives. And I've chosen to use those skills to help people find information, research their family histories, and navigate the digital world safely. Marcus sat down heavily, his face pale. The question isn't whether I'm qualified to work here, Elena continued. The question is whether you understand what real leadership looks like. It's not about demanding attention or undermining colleagues. It's about competence, integrity, and service to something bigger than yourself. Janet stepped forward, her expression mixing amazement with newfound respect. Elena, why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to be judged on my current work, not my past achievements, Elena replied. But I won't let my competence be questioned by someone who mistakes volume for leadership. Marcus stood to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him. Stay. Let's work together to make this library the best it can be. But let's do it with mutual respect and recognition that everyone brings value to the mission. 3 months later, Elena stood before the board of directors, not as a defender of her position, but as the newly appointed assistant director of digital innovation. Marcus had taken a position at a tech startup, and the library had implemented a collaborative technology program that Elena designed and led. Mrs. Patterson approached the reference desk with her usual smile. I always knew there was something special about you, dear. You just had that look of someone who'd seen the world from a different perspective. Elena smiled back, touching the small pin she now wore on her cardigan, a subtle pair of wings that honored her past while embracing her present. She'd learned that hiding her strength hadn't protected her peace, it had only delayed the inevitable confrontation. The quiet librarian still had her secrets, but now she also had her voice. And that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.